Last Saturday, thousands of people converged upon the National Mall in Washington, D.C. to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington, a day which is still thought of as the high watermark moment of the civil rights movement. On that day, August 28, 1963, over 200,000 people stood at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to hear Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lay out his vision, his dream, that one day his 4 little children would live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And it's often overlooked, but it shouldn't be, that there was a significant Jewish presence at the March on Washington all those years ago. Arnie Aronson, one of the primary organizers of the march, was Jewish. Rabbi Uri Miller, president of the Synagogue Council of America, delivered the opening benediction. Bob Dylan and Peter Yarrow of Peter, Paul, and Mary, 2 of the most significant Jewish folk singers of the 1960s, both performed at the march. And Rabbi Joachim Prince, who was not only the rabbi of Temple B'nai Abraham down the street, but he was the rabbi when it was in Newark, but was also the president of the American Jewish Congress, spoke immediately before Dr. King and delivered one of the most important and memorable addresses in the history of American Judaism. Rabbi Prince famously opened his speech by saying, "I speak to you as an American Jew. We share the profound concern of millions of people about the shame and disgrace of inequality and injustice, which makes a mockery of the great American idea." And I am so proud that last week, once again, many of the speakers at the 60th anniversary celebration of the March on Washington were Jewish. The speakers at last week's event included Rabbi David Wolpe, the recently retired senior rabbi of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, and even the Jewish comedian Sacha Baron Cohen, who, believe it or not, wrote his undergraduate thesis at Cambridge on Black-Jewish relations during the Civil Rights era in the United States. So why did Jews play such a prominent role at both the March on Washington 60 years ago and the March on Washington just last week? Well, I think you need to look no further than this morning's Torah portion to answer that question. In this morning's Parsha, Ki Tavo, we read of our ancestors' obligation to bring the first fruits as a tithe to the Kohanim, to the priests in the temple in Jerusalem. But beyond giving a tithe to the priest, this morning's Parsha also records the obligation to give 1/10 of your produce to the ger, the yatom, and the almanah, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, ve'achlu visharecha ve'saveu, so that they may eat within your gates and be satisfied. And if you stop to think about it for a minute, that is a remarkable, radical mitzvah. Thousands of years before Dr. King spoke at the March on Washington, the Torah was already obligating us to do everything in our power to support and uplift the disenfranchised, the most disenfranchised members of our society, Jews and non-Jews alike. And not only did we have to support them, we were commanded to give them enough food so that they felt comfortable sitting with us at our tables, bisharecha, within our gates. And remember, the civil rights movement in this country started with a sit-in at a Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina. On February 1st, 1964, black students sat down at the Woolworths counter in Greensboro and ordered coffee. And when they were refused service, they sat there, and they sat there, and they sat there until the store closed. And then they returned a few days later with hundreds of fellow protesters. And that nonviolent protest continued through July of that year, when finally the general manager of the Woolworths in Greensboro asked 4 black employees to change out of their work clothes, to sit down at the counter, and to order a meal. And that breakthrough moment led directly to the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, which mandated desegregation in public spaces throughout the country. But really what the Civil Rights Act accomplished was to make legal in this country something that the Torah had already mandated thousands of years ago. Every single person, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status, has the right to sit at a table and eat a meal until they are satisfied, as is befitting of a human being. And I think that is precisely why so many Jews participated in the March on Washington, because whether subconsciously or consciously, they had all internalized the fundamental Jewish idea that every human being is created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Every human being, the orphan, the widow, the stranger, gay or straight, black or white, is entitled to sit and eat until they are full and satisfied, whether at a Woolworths counter or anywhere else. In other words, the essential ideas of justice, freedom, and equality, the ideas that lay at the very heart of the civil rights movement, those ideas came directly from our tradition. In fact, Dr. King himself said as much in 1966 when he wrote the following words: "History will attest that the Hebrew prophets belong to all people, for it has been their concepts of justice and equality which have become ideals for all races and civilizations. Today, we particularly need the Hebrew prophets because they taught that to love God was to love justice, that each human being has an inescapable obligation to denounce evil when he sees it. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because decent people must be imbued with the courage to speak the truth. The Hebrew prophets are needed today because Amos said in words that echo across the centuries, 'Let justice roll down like the waters and righteousness as a mighty stream.' We need them because Micah said in words lifted to cosmic proportions, 'They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore.' And let us all say, Amen." We rise for Chatzi Kaddish on page 428, followed by the Musaf.